The journey is conversations with ordinary people about stories of transformation and how we may have had setbacks in our life and how we persevered through those, how we've learned from those obstacles, and how they've maybe helped us on our path today. Well, welcome to The Journey. My name is Kevin Polky, and I am the host of The Journey. And today we have a special guest with us, Brian Cuban. Brian and I first met back in 2016 through a mutual friend of ours, and he was our very first keynote speaker when we were launching Shatter Our Silence for the greater Rockford area. So, Brian, welcome to The Journey.
It's great to see you again, Kevin.
Yeah, it has been a while. I follow you on social media and the things that you're doing and so Brian, you've been obviously actively involved with addiction work, with writing. You're an author, you're an activist, practicing attorney.
On practicing. I haven't practiced in a decade.
Oh, okay. So but in while you were practicing, you were pretty involved with a handful of different activities of trying to raise the awareness around a handful of different issues.
Sure, to an extent, but most of that has been during my post-legal practice. But yeah, near the end, sure, I'm much happier non-practicing.
Gotcha. I understand. So, well, Brian, before we jump into too much of your story, why don't you just share when you have an opportunity to have fun? What does Brian do for fun?
I take singing lessons.
Really? Okay.
Yeah,
So, yeah,
yeah.
tell us a little bit about that. Yeah.
Well, I've been taking singing lessons for now, a year and a half, and I'm never going to be Billy Joel. It's funny when I grew up in Pittsburgh, and I'm a baby boomer, and as a lot of baby boomers, and maybe now too, our parents forced us to take piano lessons, right?
Sure.
So this was back in the '70s, and Billy Joel was just hitting it big with The Stranger, and I wanted to be Billy Joel, so I'm taking piano lessons, learning all the songs, but I have to renew. I can't. I don't have that. I don't have it right where you can hear something and just play. I don't have that.
Yep.
Beethoven, he heard it, he played, right? He saw the piano, he played.
Yep.
I couldn't do that. I see the note, I have to repeat, practice. So I was never going to be Billy Joel.
Sure.
So, but I still played and I learned, and I decided, that I wanted to take singing lessons. Why? And this was just a couple of years ago. I wanted to learn how to sing because and this goes back to an incident at summer camp that I had back when I was maybe 11 years old. There was this, it was this called Emma Kaufman Camp. It's this camp for Jewish kids. And there was this talent contest. And one of my, bunk mates said, let's go sing in this talent contest. We'll sing a Beatles song. So this was maybe 1974. And I said, sure. And so we get up on that stage. It's filled with kids and counselors and parents. And he's belting, and I just croaked. And I ran off the stage crying, and everyone jeered at me. And it was kind of like not getting back on the horse, right? When you fall off a horse, I swore I'd never sing another note again. Well, I finally decided that I was going to face that vulnerability and face that fear as an exercise, as a mental exercise. So I started, and I was horrible. I have a voice more made for radio, very deep, and I can actually carry a tune now, and I'm not afraid now, as you may have seen, to put up some of these videos in social media. And that's kind of my goal, right? I'm not looking to do, I'm never going to go out on a tour, but it was just a practice of vulnerability and overcoming that fear and overcoming that incident, that traumatic incident.
Well, it's interesting, right? So this show is called The Journey, and it's based on Joseph Campbell's hero's journey. And what you just described, Brian, is exactly what in essence is the hero's journey, right? We go back and we identify, either big T or little T traumas in our life that still play a part in our 2024 life, and we avoid things, we make excuses about things or whatever it is, and those things stay there with the same amount of energy that occurred when we were 11 or whenever they do, until we face them. And so that
Yeah,
was a great example.
yeah. Maybe when we end, I'll even sing something. Hopefully, I don't
There,
cry.
there you go. There you go. Well, it's so funny that you talk about, I live when I was bodybuilding back in high school and then later in college, my roommates were some high school buddies of mine. They were in a rock band and they were all, kind of cover band, they would change the song, change the tempos up or whatever, but essentially they were a cover band. And everyone in the band, none of them knew how to read music. None of them ever took music lessons necessarily, but they all had that, like you said, that ear for
Yeah,
music.
which
Uh,
I don't have. I think
yep.
that you can. What I've learned is that anyone can sing, right? It's a matter of facing all the roadblocks. If you Unless you're tone deaf, that makes it more difficult. If you're not tone deaf, anyone can sing, and it's just a matter of overcoming all the roadblocks your mind has put up in your life. I'll never hit this, so I'm not going to try. Because learning to sing is about learning to fail, right?
Yeah.
Because so people go online and do all these YouTube videos, right? There are YouTube videos about learning to sing, 30-day singer and all this stuff. The problem with those, and I use them too, is that you're always going to do the same thing, and you might get good at that, repeating that lesson, but there's no feedback to tell you've done something wrong, and you don't learn to fail. Learning to sing is about croaking, breaking, screeching, because you have to know what you can't do and learn how to do that.
Okay.
And there are a lot of parallels in life to that, right? Because that correlates with resilience.
Yeah. Oh, 100%. And that's what I think, I still spend a lot of time speaking in schools and doing workshops for educators as well as students. And that idea is that I may learn, I may be okay. I hear students say, I may be okay with failing at my video game or learning how to, use a certain app or something like that. But when it comes to outside of the media or social media world or the screen world, there is a resistance to failing because there's an expectation that I should already know how to do it.
Yeah, and I mean, it's just like I'm singing. No one wants to crack on or croak, right, when you're going for that high note, and that can be embarrassing. It's embarrassing for even for Billy Joel cracks, the singer's crack, and you have to learn that it's okay. And just in life, you have to learn that stepping outside of your comfort zone, there are going to be failures, and that's okay. It's what did you learn from that,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
And what's the correction?
Yeah.
And so this is what singing has taught me.
Well, I have a good friend of mine, and he's a former wrestler, and now uh, he does a lot of different things. But one of the things he does is coach young people to take that next step in their development toward wrestling. And he talks all the time about this idea that success isn't necessarily beneficial for growth. That you'll learn and develop more from a setback or
That's
from
right.
a failure.
I like to say being comfortable at the top end isn't necessarily beneficial or growing, right? Because you get comfortable with that and you never want to go past that.
Yep. Yep. Yeah, yeah, because you risk then whatever
Failure.
status you believe. Yeah,
Yeah.
yep, yep,
Risk
yep,
failure. Yeah.
yep, 100%. So, so Brian, maybe share a little bit with the audience that you've been in recovery since 2007, right?
April 8th, 2007.
Yeah.
So I just hit 17 years this
Yep.
month.
And congratulations on that.
Thank you.
That is no small achievement. As they say, we do that one day at a time.
One day at a
And
time, just like anyone else, right?
yep, yep, exactly. And as well as you've also had and shared with me struggle with recovering from body dysmorphia
Sure.
and bulimia. So
Yeah.
maybe for the audience who may not necessarily know what body dysmorphia is or bulimia, especially with us as males, maybe share a little bit about
Okay, well,
what that experience.
let's start with the straightforward one. Bulimia is an eating disorder. It's an eating disorder that affects men and women. It's binging and purging. And I don't know who's listening, so I don't want to trigger anyone, right?
Yep,
By
yep,
getting into too many details of what I did, but it is binging and purging.
yep.
And I first began that behavior as a freshman at Penn State.
Hmm.
And it wrapped around a very negative body image. I was an obese child and I was subject to just brutal bullying in school. And this was at a time when bullying was kick sand in your face, brick and mortar, right? It was at a time when there was no internet. It was at a time when going viral meant 15 kids in the lunchroom knew you had a crush on a girl. It was at a time when cell phones were 2 cups attached to a string. And so it was a much different time.
Yeah.
But shame is shame.
Yep.
Negative body image then is negative body image now, although it's framed much differently because we have all the face smoothing, the Instagram, the TikTok, and all those different things than we had then. But I was subject to a lot of traumatic events at home. I had a very difficult relationship with my mother. There was a lot of fat shaming from my mom. And I want to make it clear that I do not blame my mother for any of the mental health issues I went through. There is a difference in statistics between cause and correlation. And that is an important thing to know when we're talking about parental impact on body image or many different things, because parents do not, if you're going to, there's no, it's not cause. Parents do not cause eating disorders. Parents do not cause addiction. But if we look at the data, right, these things that happen to one person don't happen to the other. So that it might not happen to someone else going through a similar situation. That's why it's correlation. And that's why I say he did not cause my issues.
Yep. Yep. 100%
So,
agree with you. Yeah.
so it all culminated, I was even physically assaulted over my weight. And it's kind of an interesting story. It was back in 1976, and it was during the disco era that some of your list watchers will know, some of you won't. And my brother Mark had taught this disco, right? It was John Travolta, Saturday Night Fever, and all that stuff. And so he was wearing all of these bell-bottom pants and things like that, and platform shoes. And he came home one day and he gave me this pair of shiny gold bell-bottom disco pants. I mean, satin, shiny, and he gave them to me. And I love my brother, and I decided I was going to wear them to school. And they fit Mark fine, but they didn't fit me too well. I had to jump up and down, spray the water bottle. My butt looked like 15 cats trying to get out. But I didn't care, and I wore them to school, and the kids made fun of them. And in my mind, these kids that were making fun of me, again, way before the internet, they were the kids I saw every day, the popular kids in my mind, the prom queens, the prom king, the kids who are getting their first kiss, their first date, getting invited to the concerts, the kids who are walking hand in hand down between the lockers in the high school, smooching, and things I wanted so badly and associated with love and acceptance. But I thought I was too much of a quote unquote fat pig, as I had heard from my mother and from the other kids at school, to be deserving of any of that. But I wore these pants to school, and the kids made fun of them. And I'm walking home with some of these kids one day wearing my shiny gold bell-bottom disco pants. And again, I'm sort of just hanging around on the outside of this group, a lot of them were the bullies, because I felt it was like a fraternity hazing. If I took it enough, they'd one day wrap their arm around me and say, "You're one of us now, Cubes." But that's not how bullying works. And we're about a mile from my house. It's a mile walk from the high school to our house in Pittsburgh, PA, a suburb of Mount Lebanon, about 9 miles south. And they're making fun of me. One of the the pants are just so tight and so stretched. And one of the kid pulls at the top of the zipper and it rips just a little bit. Another kid goes, "Ooh," and he pulls and it rips some more, right down the zipper seam. And the next thing I know, Kevin, these kids physically assaulted me. They ripped off my shiny gold bell-bottom disco pants, tore them off me down to my Fruit of the Loom tighty whities. I was wearing a Pittsburgh Pirates t-shirts. And you'll probably remember these, the Keds tube socks, the 3-ring tube socks, Keds tennis shoes. And they threw them out in a busy street, and I had the shreds. And they walked on high-fiving like they had done the funniest thing ever, looking back, jeering at me. I go out, I pick up the shreds, and I cover up my underwear and waddle home. And I'll tell you, that 1 mile walk home might as well have been from Pittsburgh to Seattle, Washington, across the country. The walk of shame, that's how long it felt. And the worst part of that walk, Kevin, was the stoplights. Every stoplight seemed to go on forever as I'm standing there in my underwear, covering up my privates. And people are looking, but no one rolled down their window and said, "Are you okay?" And I finally got home and I walked down. The house was empty. My brothers were out doing whatever. My father fixed cars less than a mile away. My mom sold real estate. And I walked down into our basement, and I remember it was these blue old wooden stairs, these blue painted stairs in the house I grew up in, and they creaked. And with every step down, the creek, I felt it was like if you throw a stone into the pond, the ripples, right? The creek rippled out to my father, who was going to say, "My God, you can't stand up for yourself. Get out. You're one of us. And you can't, you're not a human." And he wouldn't have said that, of course. Rip it out to my mother, who would say, "I told you so." And she wouldn't have said that. My mother loved me dearly, but was dealing with a lot of her own mental health issues at a time when women couldn't talk about those things, right? And my brothers say, "Dude, couldn't you stand up to bullies?" And of course, they wouldn't have said that either. They would have gone and kicked those kids' asses. But I was so ashamed and felt I was so deserving of what happened to me that all I did was I found a wastebasket. I buried the shreds, hoping it would bury my shame and I would forget about it and that would be the end of it. But that's not how trauma works. Trauma remembers,
Yeah.
trauma threads through life. The body keeps the score. And trauma has a way, I learned in my anecdotal experience, of coming out when we least expect it later in life, of boiling over. And we may not even understand that that is what is happening, right? That first line of cocaine, that first drink. What am I trying to hide? What different person am I trying to be?
Mhm.
I'm trying not to be that fat little pig who hated himself. I'm trying to be a 40 something, a 30 something, a 20 something year old Brian who looks in the mirror and loves himself,
Mhm.
but didn't see that in the mirror. And if we go back to that moment, we talk about snapshots of our lives.
Yeah.
And I go with this theory of snapshots. I am an accumulation of all the snapshots in life, right? Pain, pleasure, trauma, joy, grief that string together to create who I am and all the context around those snapshots. And that was the first snapshot I remember when I started to see nothing but a fat pig in my reflection, whether it was the bathroom mirror, the high school mirror, the mall window reflection, the car reflection. I saw nothing but a monster. And it all goes back to that.
Sure, sure. Well, and like you said, that day kind of like bookmarked a
It
certain
did.
time period and
It did.
crystallize the why. Why do I have to drive to?
And that's right. And the why became it more like how. How can I not see that monster my first year at Penn State? And it all revolved around another incident. My freshman year at Penn State, when I began binging and purging, my father had driven me up to college, and it was this beautiful fall day in Pennsylvania, and it was crisp. The leaves are coming down, and I'm sharing a dorm with three other guys. My father's unpacking me, and I could see from this long rectangular window right into the parking lot from my dorm. And the window's open. The window's open. And I'm staring out at the parking lot and I'm looking at all these people, the kids who are unpacking, pulling their steamer trunks out of their car with all their clothes and duffel bags, parents chatting with each other, kids chatting with each other. And I make eye contact with this curly brown haired girl. And I start sweating, Kevin. And I imagine my entire life with this girl in about 5 seconds. We're going to date, we're going to get married, and we're going to have 2 1/2 children. And okay, everything's okay. Things are different now. And it wasn't a smile back at me, it was a smirk. In the sickening moment when I realized that, she puts her hands just like this. Ugly, ugly. And now I'm not the first kid to have that said to him, right? I'm not kids.
Mhm.
I'm not. It happens now. It happened then. And another kid may have said ugly back. Another kid may have flipped her off. Another kid may have just ignored it, given her the arm salute, right?
Mhm.
But, and I don't blame her either. This is just an event I remember.
Mhm.
And I remember thinking at that time, she's right. I am ugly. How can I not be ugly? I will no longer be. What do I have control over in my life? I'm just barely 18 years old, turning 18. What does a 18-year-old ugly kid have control over in his life? Food. That's it. All I had control over was food. How can I not be ugly to her, to the bullies, to my mom, to anyone? I'll lose weight. And I began restricting my food intake, restricting, and restricting. And back then, I know it's not a classification now. It would have been probably classified as what's known as EDNOS, eating disorder, not otherwise classified, right? Something like that.
Yeah,
That's,
yeah.
but that, I know that's not an eating disorder diagnosis today. But it quickly transitioned into binging and purging, and the weight started coming off. But you know what the problem was, Kevin? Every time I still looked in the mirror, I saw the fat pig monster. I would go to it was a community bathroom. I'd flush the toilet, and do the binging and purging thing so no one would hear. And for a second, I felt okay, right? Okay, this is one more. But then the shame swept in, the shame of engaging in an act that I did not understand, right? I had no idea what bulimia was. Bulimia had only been a clinical diagnosis since 1976. This was 1979. And so I didn't know what that was, but I did know that guys did not stick their fingers down their throats. That is not a manly thing. And so even though it gave me a brief second of calm, the overwhelming shame that swept in my gut was exponentially worse. But I had to have that second of calm again and again and again, but the image never changed. And that's what eventually led into we can talk about that later, my abuse, I'll use abuse of illegally anabolic steroids. Because the image never changed, no matter how thin I got, no matter how big I got, right? You're trying to change that monster that never changes. That is what started my journey descent into eating disorders. And yes, guys do get eating disorders. Current statistics are about 30%, but it could be as high as 50%, even though only 1 in 10 will seek treatment because there's so much stigma.
Well, and I think, the idea behind, starting off with the disordered eating and then it transitioning into the restriction and then usually discovering bulimic like type behaviors, right? There's this continuum that tends to happen, but almost always it starts with this perception of what I see in the mirror versus what everyone else sees.
That's right. And this is kind of what I call the core of when my body dysmorphic problem started from those years in high school on to college, where no matter what I looked at, I just saw this monster, right? So what is body dysmorphic disorder? It is a clinical diagnosis in the obsessive compulsive disorder spectrum, and it affects about 1 to 2% of the population, men and women equally. And in layman's terms, it is when you take when someone has maybe a small or even a non-existent defect in their appearance, right? It doesn't even exist, but they see it, they feel it. I won't say they see it. It's not a visual delusion. It is an overwhelming obsessive compulsive feeling that there is something wrong when you look in the mirror, whether it's your face, you think there's something in your face, whether you think you're bald, your hair, or for me, it was my stomach. It revolved with no matter how thin or muscular I got, I saw this massive stomach and everything revolved around that. And body dysmorphic disorder is not an eating disorder. A lot of people get confused, but it has a strong correlation to eating disorders. That is a strong correlation to anabolic steroid use. It has a strong correlation to suicide.
But I know for me, in my experience with that is, similar to yourself, going back, and you'll remember these, for boys' jeans back in the 70s were you were slim or you were regular or you were husky, and I was always on that borderline between regular and husky, and slim was the kid who could do 150 pull-ups in third grade because he weighed about 25 pounds or whatever, and I couldn't do pull-ups, right? And so I wasn't that I wasn't, looking back on it, it wasn't that I wasn't all that probably non-athletic. It was just that I had a standard that if you could do pull-ups or if you could do whatever types of movements, that was athletic.
Yeah.
And I remember, as I've told this story numerous times, starting to utilize working out with weights and running the summer before my seventh grade football season, because that was the first year we could play tackle, wanting to be even come close in the same direction that my father was, who played for Iowa State, um, that I got noticed because back then, no one lifted weights, and in the late 70s, early 80s, and especially middle schoolers, and the advantage that I had, I didn't know happened, plus the growth spurt I had, and it was this idea of now I was seen, or I was visible, and I was popular, and I associated this with weightlifting and with sports achievement.
Mhm.
And now it didn't matter how lean I ever got, you know, winning the teenage Mr. Illinois, Mr. USA, didn't matter how ripped I was, even if the caliper said I was at 3% body fat, as soon as I started eating, I felt fat.
Yeah.
And and
Guilt,
and
the guilt comes in and
Yep,
sure,
yeah, and you don't talk. I mean, I didn't even know to talk about it, and who would I talk to? And so it was that secret that you kept, and I just remember, staying way too long in bodybuilding. I knew it was over, that I was never gonna probably be on top again, no matter what chemical warfare I got involved with or whatever, I was never gonna get back on top. But the fear of being invisible, of going back to being nobody, was what made me continue staying. So those and it wasn't there was a part of me that knew it wasn't rational, but there also is that part where I didn't know how to shake it.
sure. I believe me, I get it.
Yeah. So as so this was your freshman year, and you have these messages that even before that incident with the gold disco pants happened, there was messages prior to that. So that was the accumulation of all those other messages that you had gotten either from mom or from other boys or girls or whatever it was. Now were true, and and then when you sounds like when you were thinking going to Penn State, it's going to be different now.
Yes.
And that move-in day going, nope,
Yep.
I happen to follow myself here.
Yes. And then I got into running. I started running
Mm,
as a release, and it was something since in my mind no one would have anything to do with me. It was something I could do alone
mm,
and feel good about myself, even
mm,
but it was coming from an unhealthy place. And so I also developed exercise bulimia. What exercise bulimia is obsessive compulsive exercise for the primary purpose of offsetting calories. So as I went into my sophomore year at Penn State, I was running up to 20 miles a day instead of going to class. I was also binging and purging. And it's when I really started to drink as well. So tremendous stress on my body. But exercise bulimia is another type of eating disorder.
true.
And
Yeah,
I've run 8 marathons, but none of them were from a healthy place.
yeah, yeah. And and I imagine, like you said earlier, even though your clothes probably changed during that
Yes.
time period, it probably because of how you were losing the weight, obviously your body wasn't adapting fast enough, and still what you see in the mirror probably wasn't satisfying enough.
And it wasn't. And if I even, it was like people if with body dysmorphia. And I would also want to, these days people use body dysmorphia so interchangeably, right? You'll hear a celeb on Instagram say, "I'm body dysmorphic," right? And I hate what body dysmorphia is an actual diagnosis that is terrible. And so we need to distinguish that from normative discontent, which everyone, there's no one in the civil, in the industrialized world that doesn't look in the mirror one day or another and say that sucks, right? I have a quote unquote fat day. I hate to use that term, but or this or that. I feel this or feel I'm bad hair day. That's not body dysmorphia. That's normative discontent that we all go through. When it turns into destructive behaviors, that is when it tips over into body dysmorphia. I don't, I cringe when the term is used like an accessory on Rodeo Drive.
Sure. Yeah.
So that we need to have that distinction. But yeah, it was if I even, it was like I could feel it, right? If even just a little bit of tightness in my pants, that would trigger me into a 20-mile run or a 10-mile run. And then I'd, you know, go home and binge a pizza or something. And then came the bulimia. It was just this vicious cycle as I moved, through Penn State. And then came the drinking because I I didn't want to feel it all. And it wasn't real. I said, I don't want to feel it all. It was just kind of this transition into problematic drinking. And at Penn State, going into my junior year, I was a full-blown alcoholic, alcohol use disorder.
And when, so alcohol, the use or the abuse of alcohol to self-medicate, that started when you were in college. You didn't, there was no use
I
before
had
that?
fair. I mean, I was doing it in high school, but because I wasn't part of any group, there
Mm,
weren't that many opportunities. And I went through the stuff like, the parents' liquor cabinet where I'd, we make our, what we called our jungle juice. We'd find a bottle and we pour just a little from each one into the bottle and shake it up and hide it somewhere.
mm,
But I wouldn't say that I was a binge. If anything, I was a sporadic binge drinker in high school.
mm.
But it became a problem in college. It became a huge problem in college, and where
Gotcha.
I was drinking, alone. I'd go to the liquor store when I turned 21, and I'd buy these little bottles of tequila, and I'd swig the bottle out in the, there was this alley at Penn State where all the bars are, and I would go into the alley and I'd swig the tequila just so I could try to feel different before I walked into a bar alone, and go just to get drunker and leave alone, feeling ashamed, and then I'd binge and purge, and I was going to class hungover. I was going to class drunk. I remember the closest I ever came to Penn State to kind of any epiphany, right, that this might be a problem, because this was back before treatment was a thing. If you were either in 12-step, or you might have someone, you got put in a hospital, or you weren't in recovery.
Right.
And so I didn't know, no one approached me in 12-step. So if someone didn't approach you, you were just going on your own, and you kind of justify to yourself that all students drink.
Mhm.
And so I walked into a hamburger joint, drunk, of course, and there was a rack of pamphlets there in this hamburger joint. And they were called the 20 questions. And I don't know if they still put them out. The 12-step group still put them out. But they were in all the different places back then. And they were geared towards college students. You black out, you miss class, and you're not, call us, right? There's a number there.
Mhm.
And I remember checking off, yes, all these things, and I crumple it up, put it in the trash basket. I'm just a college student. We all do this. That was as close as I ever came. So I was a criminal justice major at Penn State. I wanted to be a cop. That would have worked out well. I'd have been the first guy in the evidence room trading out the cocaine for the baby laxative.
Mhm.
But and so yeah, that I went through 4 years at Penn State as an alcoholic. 3 years, pretty much, 3.5 years.
Gotcha. And so as as we kind of fast forward a little bit, and when you think of the part where we can look at it from a handful of different, we hit a bottom, and for many of us, there's a series of things before we accept that we are at a bottom, right? Because we keep on, that resistance to wanting it to be over because of the fear of what's going to happen
Sure.
if we stop doing it. So when you think of when was the turning point of moving into recovery, what was, you can
Let me
share
give
about the
you a
incident.
really fast recap. Prior to that, going from high school, I went to law school and I was able to graduate, but as an alcoholic, believe it or not, I discovered cocaine in 1987. Cocaine and alcohol completely took over my life. Lost my career as a lawyer. Then by in 2000, then I went to jail, arrested for DWI, and then started using anabolic steroids. And then in 2005, I became suicidal and was saved by my brothers, really, who came into my house and had a 45 automatic on my nightstand. So all these things that happened before, leading up to 2007, right? 3 failed marriages, all failing because of drugs and alcohol. And then finally, I started dating my current wife, and she really didn't know, I had a JD in law, but I had a PhD in lying and deceit. I think, she moved in with me, and it was Easter weekend, 2007. She went away for the weekend, and I decided I'm going to go out. And the next thing I know, it's 2 days later, cocaine and alcohol and all this stuff. And she came home and I'm thinking, I'll clean up. She'll never know. I had a blackout, and she comes home, and it's Sunday evening, and there's cocaine everywhere. There's alcohol everywhere. And I asked her to take me down to a local psychiatric hospital. She was wondering if she walked in the right house. And she didn't even know I'd been to one before. So there was a lot of explaining I had to do. And I was just trying to stall to, come up with a lie to explain this Law and Order episode orgy of evidence that I might not be the person I represented myself to be, right? This upstanding lawyer.
Sure.
And she's a lawyer as well. She wasn't, we get down there, and I'm standing in the parking lot of this psychiatric hospital with her crying. And for the second time in my life. The first time was after my near suicide. And this is less than 2 years later. And three things occurred to me in that parking lot, Kevin. One, she was going to leave me. I'd leave, right? I'd leave. She didn't. She stood by me, and we dated over a decade while I rebuilt the broken trust and found recovery. And we're together to this day. And not all relationships will survive that, but ours was able to. One, because she's the same, and two, because I did the recovery work that I needed to do. And two, there wasn't going to be a third trip back because I'd be dead. And three, I thought about something my father had always said to my two brothers and I. have an older brother, Mark, people may know, Shark Tank and the Mavericks. I have a younger brother, Jeff. Mark's the oldest, and and I'm the middle. He would say to us growing up, guys, no matter what happens, no matter where you go in life, stay close, pick up that phone, find out if your brother's okay, tell your brother you love him. My father was the middle of three boys like me. My father was greatest generation. He passed in 2018. CB, Battle of Okinawa, right in the middle of the Battle of Okinawa. Been through a lot in his life. He fixed cars, ran a trim shop. They put on recovered automobile seats and things like that. Very working class. And he was passing down this gift that he had with his brothers, the gift of family. The privilege of that gift. And it is a privilege, because a lot of people, they come from broken families, they don't talk to their siblings, incarceration, parents estranged, or all these different things. And I consider that gift a privilege. And I thought about that, and I wasn't ready to lose that. And I didn't want to lose my family. No, I would never lose their love, but at this point, my brothers, they had it up to here and knew I had to do it for myself, right? Yep. They couldn't do anything. And it's important to note that I do come from enormous privilege, and privilege, and because whether it's financial and all these other things that a lot of people, vast majority of people, don't enjoy. And I think it's important to acknowledge that I acknowledge that, right? Yep. That I come from a lot of privilege. And so I decided that it was time. Why then and not in 2005 when I had a 45 automatic in my hand? I don't know. I don't know. If I could figure that out, I'd win the Nobel Prize for addiction. I don't know. and so I go home. I go home, and we go home. I didn't get admitted. I go home, and the next day I walk into my psychiatrist's office. Again, privilege. I was seeing a psychiatrist who I'd been lying to. Well, why would you lie to a psychiatrist? Shame knows no hourly rate. I was ashamed. Eating disorder, and all these different things. And I finally started getting honest with him. And he said, well, would you consider treatment? And I wasn't, my ego, I wasn't going to treatment. I'm not going to treatment. Would you consider 12-step? And again, doc, I can't go to 12-step. And for those who don't know, the AA is the most well-known, but there are other times, right?
Yep.
And I can't go. And the 12-step room was right next door. I said, doc, they smoke out there. I see them smoking. Secondhand smoke will kill you, doctor, right? I actually said, there's always a reason. There's always a reason not to recover. But I knew I had to do something to show my family, not necessarily me, my family, that I was doing something, my brothers, my wife, because she moved out the next day. And And at that point I thought I'd lost. And so I decided to go to 12 step. And so that same day, I walked into the rooms of 12 step for the first time, crying and smelled and sweaty. And I sat in the corner. And when I sat down in that little red plastic, uncomfortable hunk of chair in the corner that first time, which I would accept my desire chip that day, boy. And I remember thinking it wasn't about being an alcoholic. It wasn't about any of that. I remember thinking that if sitting in this chair will allow me for the first time in my life to wake up, walk to my bathroom mirror, birthday suit naked, look at myself and love myself without drinking or drugs, I would do that. And I would sit. And that began the journey. And as we talked about, I had so I don't know, you froze for a bit. I don't know what happened.
Yeah. I don't know what happened either. So you
Where
were
did
saying,
where did I leave off?
you were saying that I think you were just about to say that you've been sober since
Yeah, April
2017.
2007. The
Yeah.
journey continues.
Yep. Yep.
And that doesn't mean there aren't challenges. My biggest challenge today isn't alcohol or cocaine. Obviously, alcohol is background noise to me. That's another, and obviously I don't hang around anyone who does blow anymore.
Sure.
But body image is my biggest struggle today. My relationship with food and alcohol, and that is something I'm still in therapy. That is something I still work on today.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, it's interesting as I think we've talked about this before, that regardless if it's alcohol or cocaine or food or gambling or whatever it may be, it's what we consider to be a socially acceptable thing for ourselves to do. But it's, as they would say, it's a thinking disorder more so than an activity disorder. We can switch in and out activities or substances to make it more appealing or more socially acceptable or whatever, but it's the thinking that really is why.
To a degree, but for me personally, I won't speak to anyone else. It was the overpowering. Again, we're talking, there was a big body dysmorphia core there. It was needing to see something different, which pushed me into cocaine. Definitely. I mean, I knew cocaine was illegal. I was doing cocaine in the state courthouse bathroom, the federal courthouse bathroom, showing up at hearings under the influence. Did I know I could go to jail? People said, didn't you know you can go to prison? Of course, I was suffering from addiction. I wasn't an idiot, right? Of course, I knew those things. So to that extent, there's, the obsessive compulsive overpowering need to see something different overcame the thoughts, right? The rational thought process, this is illegal. Your life will be ruined.
Yeah. Well, and I think that, when you talked about sitting in that chair and starting the journey of being open and willing to learn how to think differently, learn how to act differently, and facing, kind of like even when you said earlier about facing those vulnerabilities of small things, like learning small, big things, about learning how to sing and learning how to be okay with it not working out
Well,
perfectly.
that's a great point, because it's almost like starting over, rebuilding a person. You are learning, I was rewiring my brain to move forward in a functional manner, right? Not requiring all these things. And that, at first, I mean, I was doing my 90 meetings, 100 meetings in 90 days, because I was, the pool, and I get this a lot. This is very common, I've found anecdotally, with people early in recovery from alcohol or substance. The pull back to that life. I'm alone. I'll never be loved. I need this group because they're the only ones who don't judge me. And that pool, I mean, you can delete your dealer's number, but it's still in your head, right?
Mhm.
You can trash all the alcohol bottles, but I know where the liquor store is.
Yep.
And so I had to find that support group, and it was my brothers, my father. Telling him about this was another story in itself, because he didn't understand cocaine addiction and things like that.
Mhm.
And he was so supportive. But rewiring the brain to be comfortable in my own skin around all these body image issues was brutal at first, just brutal, and it was a real struggle not to go back to that lifestyle.
Yeah. Well, and I think For me at least, the part that I have, you have to figure out how to have a new relationship with food and a new relationship with what you see and perceive to be in the mirror.
Yeah, with
And
yourself. You have to completely redefine your relationship with yourself. And I'm still doing that today.
yep,
I'm still
yep,
doing that today. At 63 years old, I'm still doing that. And that's okay.
yep,
Right. I think I do these different things like singing to redefine it,
yep.
so I'm good with that.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I very much relate, not necessarily with the alcohol and the cocaine piece, but that body, the body image, the body dysmorphia,
Yeah.
I don't do the activities, the behaviors anymore. But it's been 34 years since I competed. And but it's I know when it's getting close to summertime. I know that it's not like it isn't in the wintertime, but there's an increase in awareness and fighting off that tendency.
Well, I mean, very true. Another episode we can talk about my descent into steroid addiction. I mean, I have moderate gyno, right? And from that, and I look in the mirror and my okay, I can get surgery, I can do this and that, and then I wait a minute, right?
Mhm.
Why?
Yep,
Why would you do that? You're okay.
yep, yep,
So I still have these conversations, and but now I have the tools
yep,
to not worry about that.
yep. Well, and I think, for me, is that regardless if it's having key individuals in my life that I can talk to, being able to have someone who's a professional that I can talk to,
Mhm.
being able to be honest enough that when I'm journaling, and the way that I journal is I mean, I journal for a handful of different reasons, but part of the journaling is a conversation with God. For me, God, that and practicing, ironically, practicing to be honest with what I'm actually writing and not leaving anything out.
Yeah,
That that in itself is a whole nother exercise that I've
yeah,
struggled with at
yeah,
different times.
yeah,
And and I'm the only one seeing it.
yeah. Writing and vulnerable writing are two different things.
Yep, yep, 100%. So Brian, just for where we're at, because I definitely would like to have you on for a part two, and who knows how many other parts, because there's different elements that I think that you can bring to our audience. But when you think about, and earlier today we talked about, started this episode by talking about what you are practicing in your life today regarding doing hard things, meaning hard things in this case may not be physically as hard as it is mentally or emotionally, like the singing lessons and facing that piece of it. For individuals that may be in that place of darkness and struggling with some level of shame, what would be something that words that you would, from your own journey, that you would share with them?
Well, I would say that I'm not going to delegitimize everyone saying you don't need to feel that way, right?
Mhm,
Everyone, if they're feeling it, they have a reason they're feeling it.
mhm.
So I don't like when people say don't feel that way. You're feeling that for a reason. It's normal. It's human and normal to feel shame, right? But what I would tell you is that for me, because I'm not a mental health professional. For me, I took stock of all the people in my life, even beyond my nuclear family unit, who have supported me, and really supported Brian. And why was I not reaching out to them? Right? What was I projecting out? They're too busy. They have their own problems. There are people who want to help you. What are you telling yourself? What's the block to keep you from taking that step to those people?
Yeah, no, I think of myself as well as, clients I've worked with, and this idea of the lies that go through our narrative
Yeah.
to keep the secret. And we talk about this idea that shame has a vested interest to keep its place in control of your life. And it doesn't want to let go of
And
lightly.
when we and in the middle of shame, it's hard to really objectively figure out who our compassionate community is around us.
Mhm.
Right? Create a little wheel of your compassionate community. You're in the middle. who are the people around you that aren't part of drugs and alcohol and all those different things, who have really, who, if you just fought through it all, you could talk to, and have those people.
Well, and I think, as you were talking, and my experience has been very similar. Shame many times is accompanied with the silence and the secrets that are there.
Absolutely. Shame
And
breeds isolation.
yeah, and so when we expose that either through an individual or through a group of individuals that are safe, that we know that well, safe is probably not the right word, that there's a sacred relationship with them,
That's right.
that they can hold that space for us.
And nothing I say, you can't talk, you can talk and you can offer support, but ultimately someone has to figure out a way to break through that.
Yeah.
And but you can lay roadways, right? You can lay paths, and say, and this is where professional help is wonderful, and again, that's a privilege to be able to get it, and I get that. To kind of just do everything you can to break down those barriers where someone can at least say, yeah, maybe I could call that person. Whether they do it or not is up to them.
Yeah, 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 and I agree that there is, even though mental health services are more abundant today than maybe ever in the history of our country specifically, it still is a privilege to have available, meaning like readily available appointments.
Sure. I mean, county, there's a way, if it's county, free county.
Yeah,
And I mean, it's a privilege to have health insurance. So we have to acknowledge those things, right?
yep, yep,
That it's not as easy as just making that call. But again, there's who's that compassionate community that you don't need insurance for.
yep, yep. And to your point, there in most communities, at least especially in urban or suburban communities, there are 12-step meetings that are
Absolutely,
available, that
absolutely,
and other support groups like that. So
absolutely, absolutely. There's online and there's 12-step, but no one can drag you in there.
yep, yep, exactly. So and as we talked about, there is going to be fear to cross that threshold of that door.
Absolutely.
And for anyone, that I think at the end of the day, it's period courage that makes you step in there.
Absolutely.
uh
I'll tell you, I know we're out of time, but I'll tell you a funny anecdote. When my psychiatrist finally convinced me to go over, to leave there was a 12-step meeting starting, right?
yep,
And it was right next door. So I go over there and I'm looking in there and I opened the door and it was this long hallway of this. I remember it was this black and white tiled hallway, dirty. And I'm walking down and I'm looking in, opening the door. And I finally, oh, I'm sorry. I didn't mean to be here. The deli's next door, right? And when I finally walked in there, half of them were people I knew.
is yeah, as exactly, it's that we
People from the
when
community I knew.
yeah, and when we cross that threshold, we expose light to it, and we find out that it's maybe the monster isn't as big as we
Yeah.
project it to be.
Yeah, and then it's and it's first name only, but they look at you and like, hey, glad you're here, right?
Exactly, exactly. And it's not like we probably weren't holding it's kind of like me when I was taking steroids. I never told anybody about it, but you're not walking around as big as I was and people didn't already
Oh,
know. I
absolutely.
mean, so
We'll have to have another conversation about that because that is that is a whole other conversation. That unfortunately, the guy who introduced me to anabolic steroids, his name was Jeff Gaylord. He would played for University of Missouri, played in USFL, and he just recently passed away. And he had a tough
mm.
life, but yeah, that is another story.
Yeah. Well, Brian, on that note, I would definitely like us to set up a time period for a part two, and we'll come back and we'll revisit that for the audience.
Absolutely, this was fun.
Okay. So, Brian, what if for someone wanted to reach out to you, what's the best way to reach out to you? I know you have a
Brian with an
couple.
I at briancuban.com. And you
Okay,
can go to
perfect.
my website. You can message me through my website at briancuban.com.
All right. Awesome, Brian. Well, again, as always, I always appreciate our conversations, your energy, your experience, and just your willingness to share about your own story, but then your willingness to bring light to the darkness that other people are struggling.
I've really enjoyed it, Kevin. I look forward to seeing you in person soon.
All right, thank you. So, as you listen to Brian and I talk today, and if for some reason, regardless if it's alcohol or some types of substance, or if you're struggling with some type of body image as you're struggling with, I definitely would invite you into breaking that silence, having the courage to share with someone else, with that safe person. That it's the silence that will continue to keep us in that prison. So, as you reach out and have the courage to do that, it will be the beginning of that journey of health and recovery. As always, I appreciate you being here, and I look forward to being with you next week.